Hello, and welcome to my research presentation. I'm Yasmin, and I'm going to be going through bitter herbs and PCOS, a holistic approach. Introduction. Polycystic Ovary Syndrome, otherwise known as PCOS, is a prevalent endocrine disorder affecting approximately 10% of individuals with ovaries. It is closely associated with insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, and hyperandrogenism. This presentation delves into the potential of bitter herbs, which have been utilized in various traditional medicinal practices and are increasingly being recognized in clinical settings to serve as culturally relevant metabolic interventions for managing PCOS. So, what exactly are bitter herbs? Well, for one, they're pungent, bitter, and bold. Bitter herbs are botanicals characterized by their sharp, pungent phytochemical properties that enhance digestion and modulate gut hormone signaling. Historically, these herbs have been integral to worldwide medicine, including TCM, otherwise known as traditional Chinese medicine, Islamic, African, and Ayurvedic medicinal traditions, in addressing women's reproductive health. The activation of bitter taste receptors within the gut-brain axis by these herbs influences bowel secretion, insulin sensitivity, and ovarian function, highlighting their multifaceted roles in health. Traditionally, these kind of ingredients, bitter compounds, are utilized in tea blends, incorporated as powders, or consumed alongside food. So that brings us to the question, are bitters really better? We will now examine 5 peer-reviewed primary studies, specifically randomized controlled trials, which are a common benchmark in clinical research. These studies will aid us in evaluating real-time potential of these herbs. So what did the studies find? The studies found that berberine rivals or outperforms metformin for insulin resistance. Fenugreek reduces ovarian cysts. Bitter melon and black seed regulate hormones. Neem improves ovarian function. Insulin resistance in PCOS. So insulin resistance is a critical factor in the pathogenesis of PCOS. It contributes to elevated insulin levels that increase androgen production and exacerbate ovulatory dysfunction. Various bitter herbs have been demonstrated to improve glucose metabolism and reduce inflammatory cytokines, thereby addressing both the metabolic and endocrine components of the disorder. Some notable symptoms of insulin resistance in PCOS: weight gain, especially abdominal fat, fatigue after eating, sugar cravings, may lead to prediabetes, increased risk of anxiety and depression, skin changes, acanthosis nigricans, which is darkened skin patches, usually on the neck or armpits, and sleep disturbances, including a higher risk for obstructive sleep apnea. And so let's get into the studies. So we're looking at a study from Mishra and that is from 2022. It's a randomized controlled trial that evaluated the comparative effects of berberine, myoinsitol, and metformin in 90 women diagnosed with PCOS. Berberine showed efficacy comparable to or exceeding that of metformin in enhancing ovulation and hormonal profiles. And one of the strengths of this particular study was that it had a direct comparative analysis and relevant clinical outcomes. And one of the limitations was the sample size, the short study duration, and absence of long-term follow-up. So obviously, there were only 90 women, it was a short period of time, and there was no follow-up data. And that'll move us straight into our next. Here we're just quickly looking at a meta-analysis from 2018 from Lee. And this was a meta-analysis of 8 random controlled trials. And those trials demonstrated that berberine significantly improved fasting insulin levels, glucose levels, and waist circumference. And just looking at this analysis, we can conclude that one of the strengths was definitely the increased statistical power through pulling this data. And one of the weaknesses, we could say, was the variability in the intervention protocols, inconsistent herbal sourcing, and diverse participant demographics, because they have all of these different trials, and they are going to have to sort of come to a conclusion based on protocols and things that may have been inconsistent. There were some things that were out of the control. So that was definitely a weakness that the meta-analysis had. So we'll move right on to the next study. That's Kumar, Jar, and Singh and Meena from 2021. And this was a randomized placebo-controlled trial that investigated the effects of fenugreek seed extract on insulin resistance in women who were diagnosed with PCOS. Participants who were receiving fenugreek over a 12-week period exhibited improved insulin sensitivity, reduced fasting glucose levels, and favorable shifts in lipid profiles compared to the placebo group. The strength of this trial it was a double-arm random control trial, which was designed with a clear placebo control. So, they had a lot of data to be able to input into that because we had a control. There also another strength would be that the focus clinical population, it was literally women with PCOS. And another strength was the demonstrated statistical significant metabolic improvement in the people who participated in the trial. Some of the weaknesses were moderate sample size, and they did not evaluate long-term hormonal regulation or ovulatory outcomes. The herb extract standardization was not described in detail. And let's go to our next study. So this study was ZOO, and this one was done in 2022. It was a rodent model. Berberine was found to enhance ovarian morphology and improve insulin signaling via the P13K/AKT pathway. And one of the strengths of this study was that it was able to provide substantial mechanistic insights. And one of the limitations of this study was that the data derived from non-human subjects, necessitating cautious translation to clinical practice. So obviously, you can't always carry over what happens to an animal, to a human being. So you have to be careful with that. Nevertheless, it was a great study, and that brings us into our next study, which is Ramani, and that was done in 2016. This was actually a case review, not a study, sorry. And the case review investigated the endocrine effects of Nigella sativa, otherwise known as black seed, revealing reductions in testosterone levels and improved insulin metrics in individuals with PCOS. So one of the strengths of this study was the integration of a cultural aspect. It was through a cultural lens, using contemporary science as evidence. So that was very interesting to see that cultural lens was being used with science, which I think is a good thing. It can be a good thing, at least. And then one of the limitations was the reliance on anecdotal and traditional frameworks. And so the last study we're going to talk about is why. That one's from 2022, and it was a double-blind, random controlled trial evaluating berberine's impact on ovulation and hormone levels. The study was rigorous. It showed berberine improved ovulation frequency and reduced the LH/FSH ratios. And one of the strengths of this trial was it had a strong control group and it was hormonal specific. One of the limitations was that it had a very short duration. So, cultural and traditional use of bitters such as neem, fenugreek, and black seed possess rich historical significance, and these herbs are commonly incorporated into culinary practices and daily rituals all around the world. And overall, they not only do they embody ancestral wisdom, they help to balance hormones, they help with digestive health and metabolic restoration, aligning well with the modern integrative health approaches. So this slide was about dosage and safety, but as we kind of all have learned in our class, this course, that it's a person first kind of a whole, you can't really just you can't just dose, person to person the same. So, but this was what I was able to find was like a kind of what is presumably safe for berberine, bitter melon, fenugreek. And you obviously be careful if you're pregnant or taking other medications. So something to think about. While the studies examined present compelling evidence regarding the efficacy of bitter herbs in managing PCOS, several limitations should be noted. Short trial durations, sample sizes, inconsistent reporting of herbal standardization. And lastly, although rodent models and traditional case studies provide valuable mechanistic insights, there is a pressing need for more high-quality human trials to validate both efficacy and safety. So in conclusion, bitter herbs reveal significant promise as metabolic regulators in the management of PCOS. They are affordable, culturally significant, and demonstrate favorable safety profiles when consumed in moderate amounts. Nonetheless, there is a need for more comprehensive human trials, standardization of herb quality, and increased clinical accessibility. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and the next slide will be the references. Have a good day.